Sorry, Senator O'Neill. It is now after 2 p.m. and under the order of business, we must move to question time. I'm sure you'd agree, Senator Keneally. Senator Keneally, you have the call.
All right. Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie. National Senator Matt Canavan has said if Mr Morrison adopts net zero emissions by 2050 without the approval of the Nationals, and I quote, "It will be ugly." Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with Mr Canavan?
The Minister representing the Deputy Prime Minister, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Thank you, Senator Keneally, for your question. I think it will be ugly. I think it will be ugly. I do agree. I agree with Senator Canavan. You'll have to check with Barnaby if he doesn't. But what we're doing as a political party is carefully considering the proposal before us, and this proposal will set up a net zero position for our country over the next 3 decades, and it's only right and proper that the party that represents miners, the party that represents foresters and fishers, manufacturing workers, the party that represents farmers and those that live out in rural and regional Australia assesses the impact of this decision on our communities, and not just between now and the next election, not just between now and our own political careers, but between now and the 3 decades that this policy will be rolled out and will have impact. And we're doing that in a calm, methodical way. We're doing it on behalf of the regions. It is actually the right and proper process to go through, and our party room has primacy in this. It's not our leader having a top-down approach on what should and shouldn't happen to our communities or what should and shouldn't happen to our industries. It is each and every National Party MP and senator feeding into the leadership group what they think will be the implications and what their views are, and we're taking those forward as a group.
Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Mr Joyce has declared that if Mr Morrison adopts net zero by 2050 without the Nationals' blessing, it could be, quote, "a very hard time for the government," and, quote, "not what you want for harmonious government." What does the Deputy Prime Minister mean by that?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, I think, as I said yesterday, we have a very successful coalition government for 75 years, delivering outcomes for our nation and for the regions as a result of our shared values and commitment to deliver. Sometimes we disagree, very rarely, but we do disagree. And it is important that when we have periods of disagreement, that it is a respectful conversation, and that is exactly how we are conducting this negotiation. And so, well,
order.
And so I think it would be best, obviously, for the coalition that we come to an agreement. But we've made very clear we're not agreeing to anything that isn't right for the regions.
Senator Keneally, a second supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Yesterday, Senator Canavan refused to guarantee there would be no resignations if Mr Morrison adopted net zero emissions by 2050 without the approval of the Nationals. How many Nationals are at risk of resigning if the Morrison-Joyce government adopts net zero by 2050?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, talking about resignations over climate change policy, and going to what Nationals may or may not do is a hypothetical question. But I tell you who has actually resigned over climate change policy, and that is Joel Fitzgibbon. A great loss to the hunter, a great loss to those that care about mining jobs in this country, a great loss for the Labor Party. He should be a National
Minister,
Party MP,
Minister,
but a great
Minister,
loss to the Labor Party.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Keneally on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Point of order is direct relevance. The minister is straying into areas that have nothing to do with the question. It was specifically about the National Party and comments about National Party resignations made by a member of the National Party.
Senator Keneally, the minister was addressing the issue of resignations over climate policy. I cannot direct the minister how to answer a question. I have allowed you to draw the minister's attention back to the question, but Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr. President. And talking about resignations of candidates and MPs, it was the candidate for Fowler, I think, that actually pulled out of the pre-selection race.
Minister.
Senator Wong, do you have a point of
Thank
order?
you, Mr. President. The point of order is direct relevance. The use of a verb doesn't mean that anything associated potentially with the verb is directly relevant. We accept, I think the former President talked about glancing references to the opposition. We understand that's part of the interplay of question time, but this is a minister who has asked about Nationals resigning. That is the question. We'd ask her to be directly relevant.
No.
Well, I'm happy to move leave for Senator Canavan to speak for 2 minutes. I'm happy to give him leave.
Senator Wong.
If the government will give him leave, we will give him
leave. Have you finished your point of order?
have.
Is this on the point of order?
Order, Mr. President. The question was clearly about resignations, and Senator Keneally has great experience here enforcing the resignation of a Labor candidate for the lower house. So this is directly relevant to the question's experience.
I am listening carefully. Senator Wong, I'm listening carefully to the minister's answer. You have had the chance again to draw the minister's attention back to the question. I cannot direct the minister how to answer the question. She was dealing with matters raised within the question.
I have a submission, Mr. President.
Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. President. With respect, I'd ask you post-question time to take advice from the clerk and look at the Hansard. We are not asking you to direct her how to answer the question. We are asking you to make a ruling to uphold the standing orders as to direct relevance. And I put it to you, and I'd ask you to get advice and consider the Hansard, that a question which goes to the Nationals resigning from Cabinet over Nationals resigning, which is what Senator Canavan put on the public record, appropriate question to the Deputy Prime Minister's representative, cannot possibly be answered in a directly relevant way by reference to an entirely different matter.
Senator Birmingham.
Well, Mr. President, in considering the matters that Senator Wong has raised, I would draw to your attention the fact that Senator McKenzie very clearly went specifically to matters of National Party ministers and their current representation in the current ministerial arrangements in the very first part of her response. It is, having addressed directly the direct question asked, entirely appropriate for a minister to be able to give context, including historical context, in relation to such answers that have been given. It is entirely appropriate for a minister to be able to elaborate on a point that they're making, and in elaborating, that may mean that they are adding further context and information to what they have provided in terms of a direct response to the question that was asked, Mr. President.
I have ruled on the point of order. I will come back to the chamber and I will seek further information on this particular issue and previous rulings that have been made. My ruling, however, stands. Minister McKenzie, did you wish to continue?
I was going to put on the record, I think, Joel Fitzgibbon, a resigning member of the Labor Party. He resigned from the executive of the Labor Party, the shadow executive. And specifically on resigning around climate policy, he says the Labor Party has not made one
Senator
contribution—
McKenzie, resume your seat. Senator Van.
And my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, Senator Cash. Minister, with Australia reaching the national double-dose milestone of 70%, How is the Liberal and National government's plan to secure our COVID recovery, supporting Australians to gain skills and helping keep Australia's pipeline of skilled workers flowing?
I call the Minister.
Mr President, and I thank Senator Van for the question, and congratulations to Australians for reaching that 70% milestone. Again, it shows that we're all working together in terms of that pathway well and truly out of COVID-19. And, Mr President, in terms of vocational education and training, it's something that employers are looking for in prospective employees. It ensures that they are work-ready from day one. And the Morrison government, in terms of our investment, we are well and truly investing in a world-class vocational education and training system. Mr President, our government, at the outset of COVID-19 and at the start of the pandemic, we invested approximately $6 billion in skills funding at the commencement of COVID-19. This was the largest single investment to occur in vocational education and training ever in Australia. And, Mr President, as a government, we recognise the benefits of vocational education and training, and that is why we are now investing an additional $6.4 billion over the 2021-2022 financial year. So what we now see from the Morrison government is an investment of over $12 billion in skills funding since the start of the pandemic. And what this has seen is, whilst other countries have actually shed their apprentice workforces, what we have seen in Australia, and in particular because of the successful Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement program that we put in place, new apprentices in Australia increased 141.5% year on year. That is because of the investments that the Morrison government, the coalition government, has put in place to ensure that we are helping those businesses who wanted to keep their apprentices keep them on, but also ensuring that those businesses who wanted to bring on apprentices had the right policies in place to do that.
Your time has expired. Senator Van, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how many Australians and Australian businesses have benefited from the government's investment in boosting apprenticeship commencement wage subsidy?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And this is a highly successful investment made by the coalition government in terms of bringing apprentices on into the workforce. This is a highly successful program, and what we've now seen is around 224,000 Australians take on an apprenticeship right across Australia. What we've also seen now is over 77,000 businesses. They have successfully utilised this program, taking on another apprentice, or in the case of some businesses, they have been able to grow their business and take on multiple apprentices. What we do under the program is businesses who take on a new apprentice, they now get 50% of that apprentice's wage, up to $7,000 per quarter, subsidised by the government for a period of 12 months. So for businesses out there, you have until the 31st of March 2022 to take advantage of this wage subsidy.
Senator Van, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how will the extension of the government's successful Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement wage subsidy help keep the skilled workers pipeline flowing now and into the future?
Minister.
Mr President, one of the goals of this particular policy is to now protect the pipeline of the apprentices today so that they become the skilled workforce that employers can have access to tomorrow. We have now expanded this successful program, the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement Wage Subsidy, with an additional $716 million. Again, that is because we understand you put in place those policies that employers can lever off to grow their workforces. They can bring on apprentices, they can bring on trainees, they can offer Australians that opportunity to be trained to be work-ready from day one. And we have seen with the number of businesses who've accessed the policies and the number of Australians who've been given an opportunity across Australia that this is a highly successful program. And again, we put in place those policies that employers can lever off so that they can get that skilled pipeline of workers that they need.
Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Resources and Water, Senator Ruston. The Cabinet Handbook, which makes it clear it applies to the whole ministry, not simply those ministers in the Cabinet, requires that, and I quote, members of the Cabinet must publicly support all government decisions made in the Cabinet, even if they do not agree with them. Does Minister Pitt accept this obligation to Cabinet solidarity?
The Minister representing the Minister for Water, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Gallagher for her question. Well, obviously, as you would expect, all ministers in the Morrison-Joyce government accept their responsibilities under the Ministerial Code in relation to their obligations very, very seriously. However, obviously, as Minister Pitt has made a number of comments in relation to issues that he feels very strongly about, and obviously he has the right to make those comments and those decisions. But of course, as a government, we remain absolutely committed to sticking together. And as Senator Mackenzie, I think, had made comment today on many occasions, and yesterday and the day before. And I think she's probably very relieved that the first, she's only had one question today. I mean, I thought you might have continued with your track record of this week of asking Senator Mackenzie every question from that side of the chamber. But the one thing that this government does, the National Party and the Liberal Party in coalition, is that we work together respectfully to make sure that we deal with the issues that are important to Australians, important to all Australians, Australians that live in the city and Australians that live in rural and regional areas, because it is incumbent on all governments to make sure that we canvass the concerns of every Australian when we make very important policy decisions. And Minister Pitt, just as I and many other ministers in this government, are expressing in this debate respectfully amongst ourselves the views of the constituencies of which we represent. And I think we have seen through the responses that you have received from Senator Mackenzie over the recent days just how respectful that conversation is. And I can assure you that we will continue to have a respectful conversation with the people of Australia on this very important policy decision of our climate policy going forward, because it matters to Australians, it matters to them about what this is going to cost, and it matters how we plan to get there.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Gallagher, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Does Minister Pitt support the Prime Minister's position that the Australian government needs to adopt a net zero by 2050 commitment?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The whole government supports a platform and a plan that allows the Australian economy to be able to transition to a low-emissions future by developing a plan.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Gallagher, on a point.
Direct relevance. The question had no preamble. It was directly about the Minister Pitt's support for the Prime Minister's position. It was a very direct, purposely drafted directly to that tight question.
And I will continue. Did you have a submission, Minister, or Senator Gallagher? Allow me to rule. You raised a point of order. In my opinion, I was listening carefully to the minister. She was being directly relevant to the question. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Right now, we are in the midst of a respectful conversation, not only between the two parties of the coalition government, but with the Australian public, about a plan to make sure that we move to a clean energy future. Now, we have not made any decisions in relation to the finality of that, and so to come in here and make a whole heap of assumptions about things, we will continue to work respectfully amongst our coalition partners to make sure that we deliver a future, an energy future that does not cause households to pay higher energy prices, doesn't cause businesses to have to pay higher costs, and doesn't put Australians out of work, particularly in our regions.
Senator Gallagher.
The answer was no.
Senator Gallagher,
Thank you.
Second supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr President. One of Minister Pitt's own colleagues has reportedly said, and I quote, "He should go. He clearly doesn't agree, and it's not conducive to Cabinet solidarity." Will Minister Pitt resign?
Minister.
Well, firstly, just to set the record correctly, Minister Pitt is not in Cabinet. Minister Pitt is in the outer ministry. However, as I have said, and as Senator McKenzie said, and as so many people on this side of the chamber have said, that we are having a respectful conversation about our plan to get to a clean energy future. We understand our obligations in relation to emissions reduction, but we understand our obligations to the Australian public, our obligations to make sure that we don't tax them out of existence. We do not add a burden, a financial burden, to households' energy bills, that we don't add a burden to businesses that put them at a competitive disadvantage to the rest of the world, and that we make sure that we actually protect Australian jobs in all sectors. We are absolutely committed to deliver what we said we're going to deliver, but we will do it by technology, and we are not going to tax the Australian population and economy out of existence.
Senator Waters.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Attorney-General, Senator Cash. Today, the New South Wales ICAC has received explosive evidence from a frank and fearless public servant about the dodgy Clay Target grant for the Maguire International Shooting Centre of Excellence. It's reminiscent of sports frauds, pork and ride and all the other times the Audit Office has repeatedly found that the government prioritised coalition and marginal seats in grant funding in the lead-up to the last election. Why is your government's model for a corruption body designed to not be able to look back at the misuse of public funds? Is it because half your cabinet have been implicated in integrity scandals?
The Attorney-General, Senator Cash.
Thank you, and Senator Waters, I'll take it just as trite commentary, the end of your question. The Morrison government, as you know, we have made it very clear on our intent, Mr President, to establish a Commonwealth Integrity Commission. And in fact, Mr President, we have already put in place the required funding for when the Commonwealth Integrity Commission is passed.
Order, Senator
Senator Waters, you may be aware that we have actually committed $106.7 million of new money to the Commonwealth Integrity Commission. This was in addition to the $40.7 million in funding that we have provided for the Australian Commission for Law Enforcement Integrity, which will actually transfer to the Commission, which will take it to a total of $147.4 million. You'll also be aware this is incredibly important legislation, and we need to ensure that the model is the right model, and as such we have conducted a nationwide consultation process on exposure draft legislation to establish the Commission, and in fact 333 submissions were received, detailed submissions. 46 consultations, meetings and roundtables occurred during the consultation period.
Oh, sorry. Minister. Senator Waters.
Thanks, President. Just a point of order on relevance. My question went to whether the model would be able to investigate all of the rorts. I know the answer is no, but the minister needs to address that question.
As you say, Senator Waters, your question addressed the model. The minister was being directly relevant as to the model. Attorney-General.
Thank you. And as I said, we are consulting on the model. That was what the exposure draft legislation was all about, and the government is now considering the feedback on the model.
Senator Waters, a supplementary question.
Yes, thank you, President. It's been more than 1,000 days since this government said it would introduce an integrity commission, and yet 2 years ago my bill for a strong independent corruption watchdog passed this Senate, but you've refused to bring it on for debate in the House. The Centre for Public Integrity recently ranked that model as gold standard and your government's model as the weakest in the nation. Why won't you bring on my bill for debate so the Australian people can have the robust, effective corruption watchdog it deserves?
The Attorney-General.
Well, Senator Waters, you obviously did not listen to my previous answer. The government has its own model that it is putting forward. We have sent out the exposure draft legislation. We have received extensive feedback on the exposure draft legislation, and we are now considering the feedback on the exposure draft legislation. And that extensive feedback through that consultation process, and I took you through the consultation process, it was an extensive consultation process, will now inform the further refinement of the draft legislation.
Senator Waters, a second supplementary.
Yes, thanks, President. Liberal backbenchers Ms Katie Allen, Mr Dave Sharma and Ms Celia Hammond have all called for a stronger model that includes a broad definition of corruption, public hearings and letting the Commission initiate its own investigations. Meanwhile, Mr Barnaby Joyce described a strong corruption watchdog as a Spanish Inquisition that makes politicians terrified to do their job. Will you listen to those in your party calling for stronger measures, or are the Nationals in charge of integrity policy too?
Attorney General.
Well, again, this would appear to be your second supplementary, which mirrored your first supplementary, which actually mirrored your primary question. Again, we have undertaken an extensive consultation process. Mr President, this is an important piece of legislation. It is important that we get the details of the legislation right. That is why the government released the exposure draft of the legislation. That is why we are considering the 333 written submissions to take on board the feedback. And as I have already articulated, the feedback that we have received will now inform the further refinement of this draft legislation.
Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume. Can the minister advise the Senate how the Liberals and Nationals government childcare policies are supporting Australian families and businesses, and how will they help secure Australia's COVID recovery?
The Minister for Women's Economic Security, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Hughes for her question. We know how important childcare is for thousands of Australian families, and that's why the Morrison government has delivered a targeted, measured childcare package that is keeping out-of-pocket expenses low and allowing more parents to work should they choose. Average out-of-pocket costs are now just around $4 per hour, almost 18% lower before our childcare package was introduced more than 3 years ago. The mechanism we introduced to restrain fee growth, the cap on hourly fees, is also working, with 86.2% of services charging below that cap. But we know that these costs still add up when you have 2, 3 or more children in care at the same time. So we're bringing forward an additional support for around 250,000 families with 2 or more children in care. These families will receive an additional 30% subsidy, covering up to 95% of their costs. So a family earning $110,000 a year with 2 kids in care 4 days a week will be better off by around $100 a week. Mr President, we said we'd introduce this earlier if we could, and now we are delivering. The work we've done to ensure that the IT framework is ready and in place and centres will be prepared is underway. Mr President, we're bringing these measures forward to March next year, saving the average family with 2 children in care around $700 per week this financial year, and $2,200 a year going forward. The Morrison government is committed to increasing economic opportunities for Australian women and families, and this additional childcare support will help remove disincentives for primary carers, particularly mothers, to participate in the workforce. This is especially important as our economy begins to open up, providing women with more choices and more chances to enter or re-enter the workforce.
Senator Hughes, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Can the minister outline the economic impact of this measure?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks to these measures, the equivalent of around 40,000 parents, largely working mothers, will be able to work an additional day per week, boosting the economy by around $1.5 billion per year, right at a time next year when our economy in recovery will be in full swing. Mr President, it's not just families with 2 children that will benefit from our reforms. We're also scrapping the $10,655 annual childcare subsidy cap effective from this year. And this will be applied retrospectively for the whole of the 2021-22 financial year, meaning anyone who reaches the cap before this date will have an additional out-of-pocket costs for the 2021-22 financial year reimbursed. Mr President, it's estimated that around 82,000 families in just Senator Hughes' home state of New South Wales will benefit from this measure. Bringing forward the subsidy means that, and removing that cap will have an incredibly positive impact on families right across the nation.
Senator Hughes, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister please explain to the Senate who this childcare support is targeted at and how this differs from previous policy arrangements?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Senator Hughes. Mr President, the Morrison government's childcare support targets those who need it the most, those on lower incomes and those with multiple children. In fact, around 60% of all subsidies paid go to families on less than $150,000. More than 70% of families pay less than $5 an hour, while almost a quarter pay less than $2 an hour. Mr President, there are around 280,000 more children in childcare now than there were when we came to office, with women's workforce participation reaching record highs of 61.9% in March this year, and that remains near record highs. Let's compare this to Labor's reckless childcare scheme that would benefit millionaires the most. In fact, around $1.1 billion of Labor's policy per year would go to those earning over $250,000 a year, and a couple earning $500,000 a year would get a $50,000 taxpayer-subsidied payment. Outrageous largesse.
Minister, the time for the answer has expired. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Regionalisation, Regional Communication and Regional Education, Senator Mackenzie. Does the minister support net zero emissions by 2050?
The Minister for Regionalisation, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Senator Wong, for your question. I've written a couple of pieces which outline my views on this matter, well, going back several months. I am not an MP that has come to this place ever denying the science of climate change, but nor am I an MP that has ever signed up to a Member of Parliament, who's ever signed up to policies that will decimate jobs in rural and regional Australia. And over the time I've been in this place, there has been a number of debates in this place, and my political party has stood up for rural and regional Australians and for jobs in our communities. And we will continue to do that. I've made it very clear in my personal public commentary that I will not be signing up to any policy that is not right for rural and regional Australia, not just to get us through the next election, but to get us through the next 3 decades.
Senator Pratt.
And it is it's very easy for those who don't live in the communities that we live in and represent the communities we represent to take a different approach. Very, very similar to, like you see Senator Canavan lives in a community that is based around coal mining. But when you look at Anthony Albanese's perspective on coal mining, lives nowhere near it. I don't think there is a place for new coal-fired power plants in Australia. Full stop.
Minister,
full stop.
Minister, resume your seat. Senator Wong, I would point out there is only 6 seconds left. I'm happy to take the point of order.
That doesn't prevent a point of order.
I'm happy to take the
point
of order.
Thank you.
I was just pointing it out.
Yes, direct relevance. Demonstrably not directly relevant.
The minister was clearly being directly relevant in the first part of her question. I agree that towards the end she strayed from direct relevance. However, the minister was being directly relevant through the answer to the question, and you certainly you have 6 seconds, Senator Mackenzie. Do you wish to continue? All right. Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Does the minister support the Prime Minister's position that the Australian government needs to adopt a net zero by 2050 commitment?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr President. Thank you, Senator Wong, for your question. I support the Prime Minister pursuing a technology, not taxes, approach to lowering our emissions in this country. Absolutely. As a species, the human species over eons has progressed through the adoption of technologies. Now, the National Party in the Senate has been very, very clear. We moved amendments and tabled amendments when it came to clean energy financing that backed the low emissions technologies of carbon capture and storage. And I really wish we could get Larissa Waters and her team onto how we actually can protect jobs at the simultaneously lowering emissions, and that is through those types of technologies.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Gallagher.
Direct relevance again. This minister is flagrantly ignoring the direction you've provided her in question time. She is, raising issues about the Leader of the Greens in a question about whether she supports the Prime Minister's commitment on net zero cannot be directly relevant to the question she was asked.
The minister
She's avoiding it.
Senator Gallagher, please resume your seat. As has been made clear by previous occupants of this chair, glancing references to other parties and glancing references to the policies of other parties is acceptable. It does need to be a glancing reference. At this stage, I do not believe it could be described as more than that. Senator McKenzie did. Senator McKenzie was addressing the question. Senator McKenzie, you have 9 seconds. Did you wish to continue?
So when we talk about the Prime Minister's plan and our government's plan to use technology, not taxes, to lower emissions in this country, get on board with some of your smart unions who actually are backing nuclear.
I'm not sure what happened with the clocks there. It went to— well, I'm not sure what happened there, but the clock suddenly went to zero, so I will continue. A second supplementary.
Thank you. Second supplementary. If the minister isn't prepared to support the Prime Minister publicly and here in the parliament, is she prepared to resign from his cabinet?
Minister.
Well, thank you so much, Mr President. I don't know how you're going to rule on this one if I say that's a hypothetical question. And once again, Senator Wong is scoping out using question time to cheaply score political points. What I would like to know from the Australian Labor Party is whether they actually support regional jobs, whether they actually back Merrill and Joel and actually back the mining industry in this country. At least the forestry division of the CFMMEU has the guts to stand up for workers. Why doesn't the mining division? Why isn't the construction division? If you actually cared about workers in this country, you would be standing up.
Minister. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President.
I was calling the minister to order.
Thank you. I just note that over that period of time, more time was wasted, again on matters entirely irrelevant to a question that was clearly about her obligations as a cabinet minister. How can what the CFMEU Forestry Division does be relevant in any way to this minister's obligations as a cabinet minister?
Minister.
Yes, I was an officer of that union. What's that got to do with anything?
This is not a time for debate across the chamber. Senator Wong, please resume your seat. Minister, you have 17 seconds left. Senator Wong has called your attention back to the question. Senator Wong, please do not interrupt me when I'm making a ruling. Senator McKenzie, Senator Wong has brought your attention back to the question. You have 16 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm sorry that my comments and me not accepting the premise of your question actually upset you so much, Senator Wong. I know it's been a while since you've been in cabinet,
that's fine.
but the handbook—
Minister. No. Sorry, Senator Wong. Go ahead. Is this a point of order, Senator?
A point of order on direct relevance. You gave the minister the courtesy, as the president should, of reminding her that I had drawn her to the question. She has abused the graciousness of the chair and simply then proceeded on exactly the same tack.
No, I disagree, Senator Wong. The minister is entitled to reject the premise of the question. Senator Mackenzie, you have 3 seconds left. Senator Mackenzie?
I, more than any other, are very aware of cabinet standards and the minister.
Senator Mackenzie. Senator Scarr, order.
Mr President, my question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. Can the minister update the Senate on Australia's partnership with Papua New Guinea, our closest neighbour, in response to the current COVID-19 third wave?
Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
I thank Senator Scarr for his question and particularly for his interest in this very important area. The COVID-19 situation in Papua New Guinea is very concerning, as we're seeing a new surge in cases associated with the Delta strain, and it is placing significant pressure on the health system. Both the Prime Minister and I have spoken with our Papua New Guinea colleagues to discuss the challenges that they're dealing with, including to assure them that Australia is standing by them at this very difficult time. Since the start of the pandemic, we've been partnering closely with the government of Papua New Guinea on their needs. That includes over 2 million pieces of PPE, testing equipment and supplies, oxygen concentrators and pressurised air masks, over 100,000 genomic tests with support from Melbourne's Doherty Institute to identify COVID-19 variants of concern, and support to enable increased provincial health service delivery through church health services. We have now deployed 5 Australian Medical Assistance or AUSMAT teams to Papua New Guinea to provide critical care planning and clinical care. We're now providing further assistance as Papua New Guinea responds to this most recent concerning surge in cases. That includes partnering on the reopening of the Nightingale Centre to increase the capacity of Port Moresby General Hospital and support to important provincial health authorities to maintain their essential operations. We're supporting Papua New Guinea to vaccinate more frontline health workers and expanding commercial vaccination hubs, including in major urban centres like Lae. The Australian Defence Force is providing logistics support and vaccination training to the Papua New Guinea Defence Force, and I acknowledge the exceptional working relationship between the PNGDF and the ADF. Australia will continue to meet Papua New Guinea's vaccine supply needs and support their vaccination rollout program in partnership with the Papua New Guinean government.
Senator Scarr, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister update the Senate on the fabulous work of the Australian Medical Assistance Team members in Papua New Guinea?
Minister.
I thank Senator Scarr for his supplementary question. It is indeed exceptional work that those AUSMAT teams are doing. A 7-person AUSMAT-led team arrived in Port Moresby this last Saturday on a flight that also delivered 40 of the oxygen concentrators that I referred to earlier. It's led by one of AUSMAT's most experienced doctors, Dr Mark Little. The team includes a nurse practitioner, a public health specialist as well as logistics experts. I would acknowledge and thank Dr Little and the greater multiple AUSMAT teams who have deployed to Papua New Guinea and the Pacific through the COVID-19 pandemic. The team has strong experience partnering with Papua New Guinea's health officials. They will be in PNG for 3 weeks. They'll work closely with the Ministry of Health and the important National Control Centre. The team will identify further priorities for assistance, including additional clinical support to manage the surge and medical equipment that can be deployed within Papua New Guinea's health system.
Senator Scarr, second supplementary.
Mr President, can the minister outline Australia's work with Papua New Guinea to support their vaccination program? Minister.
I thank again Senator Scarr for the question. Last night, Australia delivered a further 60,000 vaccine doses to Papua New Guinea. We're committed to working with them to meet the needs of the country. We're partnering with the government, with business and with NGOs to promote the importance of vaccinations, and we've launched a campaign with the Papua New Guinea Council of Churches to address hesitancy issues. The ADF is providing logistics support in the Torres Strait border region, where vaccination rates are now the highest in Papua New Guinea. An Australian-funded clinic in Port Moresby has itself administered over 13% of the vaccinations administered nationally. We're supporting pop-up clinics at convenient locations like shopping centres. Australian experts are also working with PNG and the WHO on a plan to expand and accelerate the rollout, prioritising those provinces with the highest numbers of cases.
Senator Faruqi has the call. Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific, Senator Seselja. The climate impacts of your coal, oil and gas-loving government are being felt first and foremost by nations who did nothing to create this crisis, including our Pacific neighbours, who are watching their children's future disappear underwater. Yet Australia has abjectly failed to deliver its share of climate finance as committed to in the Copenhagen Accord. A report by the Climate Action Network Australia released today has calculated Australia's fair share to be $3 billion over 2020-2025 and $12 billion annually by 2030. Now that we know that Mr. Morrison will show up at COP26, will he commit to increasing Australia's measly climate finance contribution to pay our fair share, or will Australia remain an international outlier on climate?
The Minister for International Development, Senator Seselja.
Well, thank you very much, and I thank the Senator for the question. The short answer to the question is that Australia has made a strong commitment to climate finance, including in the Pacific. And that includes, between 2020 and 25, $1.5 billion, with at least $500 million of that going to the Pacific. So that's to directly answer your question. There are a number of other pejoratives in your question, some of which I'll seek to address. But when it comes to the issue of climate finance, we will have more to say going forward. But when it comes to doing our bit, we absolutely reject the Greens' constant, incorrect, inadequate assertions that we are somehow not doing our bit when it comes to climate change. Now, we hear from the Greens constantly. They parrot it, they talk our country down, and they ignore the facts. They ignore the facts. And when I'm speaking with Pacific leaders, we deal with the facts rather than the assertions that are made by the Greens. And those facts include that we have reduced our emissions by 20% since 2005. And when we compare that to other similar economies around the world, we are doing far more than our bit. When you look at countries like Canada, where we are well ahead, when you look at the OECD average of wealthy nations, we are well ahead. We have reduced our emissions at a faster rate than places like US and Japan and the OECD average. So the Greens might want to put forward this assertion, which is completely not based in fact, which is in fact incorrect. You might want to talk our country down when it comes to these actions, but whether we're talking to our Pacific neighbours or whether we are going onto the world stage more broadly, we have a proud record. And we will do our bit and continue to do our bit and work with countries in the region and beyond to deal with these challenging issues.
Senator Faruqi, a supplementary question.
Minister, Australia was instrumental in discussions at COP15 that led to the establishment of the Green Climate Fund. But since 2018, the Liberal National Government has contributed $0 to the Green Climate Fund. Why did the Australian government abrogate its responsibility and stop contributing to the Green Climate Fund, and will you commit any money to this fund again?
Minister.
Well, in terms of specific issues around the Green Climate Fund, they are decisions that will be made not by me, I will say, but when it comes to the history and when it comes to contributing to climate finance, we have made our intent clear. And we have done it in all sorts of ways, as I outlined in the answer to your first question. And going forward, we have committed $1.5 billion to climate finance around the world, with at least $500 million of that to go to the Pacific. And as I said earlier, we intend to make further announcements in that space. But I go to the point. Australia is doing its bit, will continue to do its bit. We do it in a way that protects our economy. We do it in a way that works with our partners in the region. We take our responsibilities to our Pacific family very seriously. We're not going to be lectured to by the Greens on how we should do that, but we have a proud record despite your attempts to talk it down.
Senator Faruqi, a second supplementary question.
Minister, when the world was debating solutions to climate change, you were still fighting over whether it is real or not. Now we are in the critical decade and the world has moved on to establish meaningful 2030 targets. The Liberals and Nationals are having a brawl over 2050 targets. When will you stop being laggards, listen to science and increase your miserable targets to the strong action our communities and our Pacific neighbours are demanding?
Minister.
Well, thank you, and I thank the senator for the question. We certainly won't be taking our lead from the Greens when it comes to our response on climate change or very few other issues, it must be said. Now, the Labor Party might take their lead from the Greens when it comes to responding to climate change. They may well, and we've seen that in the past. And the big danger for this country is if they were in government again, that they'd take their lead from you. And we got an insight into that from Senator Gallagher just this week, when she left open the possibility of bringing back a carbon tax if the Labor Party come back in. So we know that if there's a Labor-Greens government in the future, the Greens will be pushing for a carbon tax. The Shadow Finance Minister says all options are on the table, including the carbon tax. So we won't be following your advice when it comes to responding to climate change. We won't be following the Labor Party's advice, and the Australian people need to understand that if there was a change of government, it would be the Greens dictating to the Labor Party, who say they are open to bringing a carbon tax back.
Minister, your time has expired. Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. We are now 20 months into this pandemic and the Delta strain is ripping through Papua New Guinea, a mere 4 kilometres away from Australia. Isn't Senator Fierravanti-Wells right to say that this government, and I quote, has dropped the ball on providing urgent support to our most important Pacific partners?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
I absolutely reject Senator Wong's question, and I absolutely reject the proposition that is apparently put by Senator Fierravanti-Wells, which I have not actually heard. As I said in response to the previous question from Senator Scarr, who has a deep and abiding interest in these issues, we have been working very closely, in particular with Papua New Guinea. Let me repeat, for the benefit of the chamber, that working in partnership with another government involves recognising their sovereignty, their leadership and their systems to address some of the most significant challenges that they are dealing with in the context of a global pandemic. There is no doubt whatsoever that for Papua New Guinea, for Timor-Leste, for Fiji, for a number of countries that have dealt with significant surges of COVID-19 in the region, that this has been a very difficult period, and each government has dealt with it in their own way. I acknowledge particularly the efforts that the government of Fiji has made to reach such high vaccination levels amongst its population. I acknowledge the work that Papua New Guinea is doing and has been doing for a very long time in extremely difficult circumstances across perhaps the most complex geography you can possibly imagine to try to address the challenges of COVID-19. Mentioned in my remarks, in response to the previous question, the personal protective equipment and testing equipment and supplies we've delivered, the oxygen concentrators, the pressurised air masks, the genomic tests, support with provincial health service delivery, and the closeness with which we are working with the government of Papua New Guinea on addressing very difficult issues of vaccine hesitancy. I don't think we should underestimate those. That's why we're working with churches and non-government organisations, the government itself, in many of those places. In Timor-Leste, I'm pleased to say—
your time for the answer has expired. Senator Wong, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Why has the Morrison-Joyce government failed to work with our partners in Papua New Guinea to rally a global multilateral response to support PNG's health system? Is it because it is led by what Senator Fierravanti-Wells described as the Prime Marketing Office instead of the Prime Minister's Office?
Minister.
It's interesting to suggest, I would say to the chamber, that working with the WHO, with Gavi, with CEPI, with UNICEF, with humanitarian and development assistance deliverers, like many of the agencies here in Australia that we support, working with ISOS, with Aspen, other organisations, particularly the Regional Director of WHO, Regional Director Keshi, who is one of WHO's leading administrators. I do think that is an example of the work that we are doing with those sorts of international groups to which Senator Wong has referred. As I said, I'm not the beneficiary of the views put by Senator Fierravanti-Wells, but based on Senator Wong's assertions, I don't agree with them.
Senator Wong, a second supplementary.
They were views put in the Parliament, Minister. You might want to acquaint yourself with them. And I again ask this, and I ask a supplementary question, which is this: why has the government left the fate of one of our closest neighbours and most valuable partners in the hands of ministers that Senator Fierravanti-Wells describes as a revolving door of L-platers?
Minister.
Well, Senator Wong, I'm not sure that perhaps Senator Wong has the detail that would be helpful to her in relation to the work that the government has done with the government of Papua New Guinea. And I'm not sure it would come from the remarks of Senator Fierravanti-Wells in this case, given what you have explained to me. Given what you have explained to me, Senator, I think you're reflecting unfairly on Senator Fierravanti-Wells, and I think that's most unfortunate, Senator Wong, that you would reflect unfairly on Senator Fierravanti-Wells. Because what is important here, Senator Wong, is the work that we are doing with the government of Papua New Guinea. The government of Papua New Guinea, a sovereign nation with whom we are honoured to work and with whom we work very hard to address the sorts of challenges that other senators have raised sensibly and constructively in the chamber.
Senator Smith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you.
Smith,
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, Senator Reynolds. Can the minister advise the Senate about her recent visit to the Kimberley region of Western Australia and how NDIS services are being delivered in rural and regional Australia?
The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, Senator Reynolds.
Well, thank you very much, and firstly congratulate you, Mr. President, on your appointment, and thank you very much, Senator Smith, for the question, and thank you also for your passion and commitment for the people of the Kimberley. Since becoming Minister for the NDIS 6 months ago, I've been listening and consulting widely on all aspects of the scheme. Recently, I spent a week travelling across the Kimberley region to hear and see firsthand the impact of thin markets on how the NDIS is able to support people with disability in regional and remote communities. This included many meetings, such as the ones with staff and volunteers and organisers at the Yarrayungi Aboriginal Medical Service in Halls Creek, the Women's Resource Centre in Fitzroy Crossing, the Lions Outback Vision Institute in Broome, and also the East Kimberley All Ability Sport and Recreation Program in Kununurra. I thank them all for their hospitality, their time and also their openness. This allowed me to hear and see firsthand how the NDIS is transforming lives. However, it also allowed me to see firsthand the challenges in providing care and support in remote and regional communities. The negative impact on thin markets is very clear. The workforce shortages further exacerbate service availability. Average plan budgets in the Kimberley are actually around $10,000 higher than the national average, while utilisation is 20% lower at 51%. And quite clearly, Mr. President, this needs to change nationally. I hope to bring forward legislation this year to start addressing these problems of thin markets by providing the NDIA with more flexible commissioning models. Mr. President, the level and the quality of support received by any Australian on the NDIS should never, ever be determined by where they live. But today, sadly, with thin markets, that is still the case.
Senator Smith, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your visit to the Kimberley was indeed very, very well received and welcomed. What are the challenges for the National Disability Insurance Scheme across regional and rural communities across our country?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Smith, for that question. The NDIS fourth quarter report shows plan utilisation in the Kimberley region is 20% lower than the national average, which sadly is not uncommon in remote communities, in particular across Australia. And that is not just the case for disability services, but for the provision of all care and support services in remote communities. There are so many experiences from this trip that I will always remember. But sadly, one is where my heart literally broke, meeting a quadriplegic participant in her 40s in a remote aged care facility. She knows exactly how she wants to live her life with her children. But sadly, living so remotely, the life she wants to live is not yet possible. She has nowhere else to live, to stay near community, or get the support she needs so badly, and that she's actually funded from her NDIS packages. The upcoming changes to legislation will help us all address this.
The time for the answer has expired. Senator Smith, a second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. What are the next steps to address the issues that you observed during your visit to the Kimberley region?
Minister.
Thank you again, Senator Smith. To tackle the endemic issue of thin markets, we have to enable providers to operate effectively nationwide, no matter where they are delivering services. To do this, we have to build local workforces across regional and remote Australia for all types of care and support services. And this is a shared responsibility with the federal government and the state government. I'm delighted to be working with Pat Turner and the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation to develop a model to deliver in new and different ways a wide range of care and support services in remote communities, including for NDIS participants. Together, we are developing a regional community-based workforce model informed by the needs of locals to provide long-term employment opportunities and better support for people living in remote communities and also remote towns.
Minister, Minister Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.
And that ends question time for today. I will just ask senators to give us a few moments while we move to taking note.
Are there any motions, Senator Keneally? Yes, Madam Deputy President. Under Standing Order 74.5a, I seek an explanation from the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham, as to why questions on notice numbers 236, 238, 240, 242 and 255 from the Finance and Public Administration Estimates hearings remain unanswered. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Deputy President, and I thank Senator Keneally for advice shortly prior to question time in relation to these matters. Deputy President, as I informed the Senate earlier this week, there have been quite an unprecedented number of questions posed through the life of this parliament, both questions on notice provided through the chamber as well as questions on notice through estimates committees. In fact, if my recollection is correct, those coming through the chamber running close to being in excess of the total number handled in the two previous parliaments combined, showing the many thousands of questions that have been presented. Overwhelmingly, those questions are answered and answered in as timely a manner as possible. I'll look into to the particulars in relation to the questions that Senator Keneally has highlighted, and no doubt efforts will be made to provide responses to those in as timely a way as possible.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Keneally. Madam Deputy President, under Standing Order 74.5b, I move that the Senate take note of the explanation. Well, what will happen first in Australian politics? Will the Prime Minister hop into his car and head down to the Governor-General's to call an election? Or will he and his ministers finally answer the questions put to them here in the 46th Parliament? It's disturbing how easily those opposite ignore their duties as public servants in this place. Accountability, transparency, responsibility, all nouns without a home in the Morrison-Joyce vernacular. "I don't hold a hose, mate," said the Prime Minister. Well, he doesn't hold any answers, apparently, either. He doesn't appear to do much of anything. We know that the Prime Minister failed on the two jobs he had this year, roll out the vaccine and set up fit-for-purpose quarantine. Now, today, I have picked 5 questions that have been ignored by this Morrison-Joyce government. 5 questions. Here they are. Here they are, 5 questions. But they are over. There are hundreds. There are 500 questions, over 500 in fact, unanswered, dating back to March 2020. March 2020. Pre-pandemic questions, no answers yet provided. Those unanswered questions from March 2020 were asked to the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr Morrison. The Prime Minister won't answer them, and if that's the example he's setting, then no wonder the Morrison-Joyce government acts the way that it does. A fish does rot from the head down, after all, and this rotten behaviour undermines the community's faith in our democratic institutions. There are some in our community who might think this is all business as usual. But there are an increasing number of Australians who are growing disillusioned with the way Mr Morrison plays politics in this country. They see the bad behaviour of the Morrison-Joyce government go unpunished and think that it represents the parliament at large. My message to those people is this. This is not normal. This is not the status quo. This is how bad government operates. The Morrison-Joyce government have plumbed to new depths in every aspect of accountability and transparency. Compare this government to its most recent predecessors. I personally never thought we would pine for the days of Prime Minister Turnbull, but a comparison between then and now just shows how quickly the standards have deteriorated under Mr Morrison. Dr Parkinson, the former Secretary for the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, put the real value in accountability and transparency. That standard was set from the very top, and it flowed down accordingly. There was an expectation that you would do your job as a minister. Now, they got it wrong under the Turnbull government, a lot, but at least on occasion people were disciplined. They were disciplined for misconduct. They were disciplined for their lack of accountability. Now, the current Prime Minister, Mr Morrison, does not punish bad behaviour, he rewards it. Look no further than the current Minister for Emergency Management and National Recovery and Resilience. This is an unlimited debate, Madam Deputy President, but yet I still wouldn't have enough time to go through the intricacies of the sports rorts scandal. The sports rorts scandal saw Minister McKenzie forced to resign, but not before she was quickly brought back by Mr Morrison. And now she is deciding Australia's climate change policy. She is one of the gang of 4 that's going to decide how many millions or perhaps billions of dollars of pork are going to flow through to allow Mr Morrison to secure a deal on climate change. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Certainly we saw today the minister openly threatening her cabinet colleagues. Quite an extraordinary performance in question time. But Minister McKenzie is one of the many scandal-prone ministers who've made startling comebacks under Mr Morrison. Ministers Taylor, Joyce, Colbeck, Cash, Lay, Dutton, Fletcher, Robert, Tudge, Hunt, Ruston, Reynolds, Porter. If you want to work out what they did, go to our website, notonyourside.com.au. If you're a backbencher in the Morrison government, if you are stuck looking at the back of someone's head in question time, you have got to be asking yourself, what have I done right to be stuck up the back here? It's truly staggering what gets rewarded on Mr Morrison's watch. Ministerial standards, dead under Mr Morrison. And we will see that again, I predict, when after the Cabinet adopts net zero by 2050, Minister McKenzie and Minister Pitt don't have to abide by the ministerial guidelines. Let's see if they get a free pass. Comparing the days of old with the current standard is truly an exercise in despair. A stark contrast between a bygone era when ministerial standards and government accountability existed and the utter mess that we are in today. This Prime Minister doesn't like answering questions because he knows the Australian people won't like the answers. This is a Prime Minister that governs by focus group. How do we know that? Because his own colleagues, one of his own colleagues told the media that at the heart of the Morrison government sits a focus group. His own colleagues, Senator Fierravanti-Wells, called the Prime Minister's office the Prime Marketing Office. And so hundreds of unanswered questions on notice is a massive red flag to the Australian people. Let's be clear, if the answers were any good news for the government, they'd be shouting them from the rooftop. The Prime Minister can't build a chicken coop without a ribbon-cutting ceremony and a social media post. And that is because he is all photo-op and no follow-up. Now, there's very little substance to what goes on in the Morrison government. There's no big grand plan. There's no ambition for the Australian people. The Morrison government, Mr Morrison and his ministers, they're not interested in Australians' jobs. They're only interested in their own jobs. Mr Morrison doesn't care about anything except his own political agenda. And he is certainly not on the side of the Australian people. If Mr Morrison was, he would be up front with the Australian people. He would answer the questions put to him in this parliament. He would hold ministers account for their actions and behaviours. He'd be proud of his work rather than hiding the answers in the shadows. The Australian people have a right to know, in a democracy, what decisions are being made in their name and how their taxpayer dollars are being spent. The problem for Mr Morrison is on the rare occasion that he and his ministers do answer questions, the Australian people don't seem to like their answers. And so they know that being truthful to the Australian people will jeopardise their own job security. And there's an election right around the corner. Do we seriously think these 500 questions that haven't been noticed are somehow 500 good news stories kicking around the ministerial wing they're going to roll out in the advent of an election? Of course not. That's absurd. These are questions they don't want to answer before an election because they don't want the truth to come out. So the Australian people have a right to know how their government's being run. Scrutiny of the Morrison-Joyce government is essential. It's essential for our democracy. It's essential for restoring the public's faith in democratic institutions. Because on this government's watch, we have had sports rorts. We have had robo-debt. We have had the Ruby Princess. We've had safer seats rorts, the Leppington Triangle, car park rorts, jobs for mates, Paladin, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation grant, Hello World, Job Keeper rorts, where they gave $13 billion of taxpayer money to companies that turned a profit during the pandemic, and they're not lifting a finger to try to get any of that money back. Under robo-debt, the pursuit of the penniless in robo-debt, some of them to their deaths, but to their corporate mates, don't lift a finger. Don't even suggest they might want to pay the money back. $13 billion wasted. $1 trillion of debt run up, and so little to show for it. Of course, what did we see last week? The Building Better Regions rorts. What a joke. What a joke. The money overwhelmingly going, 90% I think it was, to government-held or marginal seats. Of course, let's not forget, as Senator Green points out, some of it went to areas that could only, in the wildest of expectations or imaginations, be considered regions. I think in New South Wales, my personal favourite being the regional funding that went to refurbish the North Sydney swimming pool. Right there, under the Harbour Bridge, next door to Luna Park, directly opposite the Opera House, a regional fund to build a swimming pool. I don't know, maybe they think people from the regions in New South Wales like to travel all the way into North Sydney to have a swim. Anyway, we know billions and billions and billions of dollars of rorting, scandal, waste, mismanagement under this government's watch. It seems every time they appear before Senate estimates, what do we get? Another colour-coded spreadsheet. What did we hear last week? Ann Webster, the member from Mali, in the other place, she just basically belled the cat. She inadvertently let it out of the bag. There was a green spreadsheet and a pink spreadsheet, but only government members got told about the green and the pink spreadsheets. If you wanted your project to move from the pink to the green, you had to lobby really hard, some government minister. Well, no wonder about 90% of the funding went to government or marginal seats, because they were running a color-coded spreadsheet scheme. This is why the Morrison government ministers and the Prime Minister himself are not answering questions put to them through the Finance Committee. I can't imagine how bad this is all going to look when the ANAO inevitably reports on all the dodgy pork barreling that's going to happen to get to a deal on net zero emissions by 2050. What was it? One of the government members called it a giant green rainbow that's going to spread across the regions with crocks of pork sprinkled about. And we've got a minister here in the chamber, the Minister for Finance, who won't even tell us how much money they're prepared to spend for this political fix, who won't even tell us if it's in the budget. That $1 trillion of debt, nothing to show for it, going up and up, just a political outcome. But this is an inevitable outcome when you have a Prime Minister who views every act of governance as a marketing opportunity. There's nothing that can be solved with a catchy slogan, no storm that can't be weathered. I mean, look what we saw in the chamber here today. The Morrison-Joyce government sought to politicize domestic violence victims. Here I strike a deal with the Minister Alex Hawke. After 2 years I've been trying to get a meeting with the Minister for Immigration. Finally I get one. Finally we get a deal. We get an agreement. We're going to deliver this piece of legislation. We're going to fix some things for women and children who are suffering from domestic violence. We're going to deal with the problem of low-level offending. We're going to try to address the concerns raised by New Zealand. We strike a deal. We're going to come to a conclusion in 2 weeks' time. What happens? Mr. Morrison pulls the rug out underneath his own minister, because what would he rather have? A political outcome, not a practical solution. And what a low act. Women and children who are victims of domestic violence? Is there anything this Prime Minister won't politicise? The Morrison-Joyce government does not, as the Prime Minister once said, burn for Australia. They simmer in self-interest. The Australian people are waking up to the Prime Minister's shtick, his ad man approach, his prime marketing office, and there's something to see here with these unanswered questions. There must be, because they wouldn't be so intent on hiding the answers if there wasn't. Being the Prime Minister of Australia actually requires leadership. It means making the tough decisions, being held to account. It means bringing people with you and holding them to a standard. So, the malaise that swept through the Cabinet is a choice made by this Prime Minister because it's the easy way out. And it's the Australian people who are worse off as a result. This Prime Minister won't hold himself or his ministers accountable. I hope the ministers and secretaries listening today do take notice and take time to prepare thoroughly for Senate estimates next week. We can't expect questions to be answered when they're taken on notice, so we're hoping for a lot more cooperation in the room next week.
Thank you, Senator Keneally. And I believe you wish to speak on the same matter, Senator Patrick.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
So I rise to also take note of the minister's answer to Senator Keneally. There's a great difficulty taking place in the chamber in that we are asking questions, as we do as part of our oversight role. It's an important role of the Senate to ask questions, to inform itself as to the conduct of government, such that we can do our job properly, we can discharge our responsibilities properly in the oversight of government. Yes, questions are asked, and there's a time requirement placed in the standing orders, or in the case of estimates, time requirements placed by the committees themselves for the return of those answers. And it is disrespectful for ministers not to supply those answers within the recognised timeframes. It's disrespectful not just to the senators who ask those questions, but to the people who those senators represent. I ask many questions on the basis of an email I receive in my electoral office from a constituent that just wants to know something, and so I'll happily put a question on notice if a South Australian asks me a question and I don't know the answer. It's an important process. Now, of course, we could stop questions on notice if indeed the government found some other source of money to pay for the things that it does. But you know what? It gets its money from taxpayers. It gets its money from the citizens of Australia, from the businesses of Australia. And until such time as you find some alternate source, I'm sure senators will continue to ask questions. Now, Minister Birmingham stated on Monday and again today that the number of questions that are being asked and answered in this parliament are significantly more than in the last two parliaments. In fact, I think he said that the number of questions answered this parliament equals the same as the last two parliaments combined. Well, let me just talk about that. There is a fundamental difference between a response to a question and an answer to a question. I can give one example in relation to National Cabinet, in which sorry, it wasn't in relation to National Cabinet, it was in relation to the cost of some proceedings that concluded over a year ago, and I've had to ask three times for an answer. So maybe that explains the reason why there are more questions to this government, because they simply don't answer the question, they respond to it. And that means I have to go back and now ask a second question. And sometimes I have to ask it again. So please, Minister, do not stand up in this chamber and suggest that there's something untoward going on here on this side in terms of how many questions we're answering, because on your side you're simply not answering the questions properly. You're responding, but you are not answering. And when you start lifting your game, maybe these problems will disappear for you. Maybe, Minister, you can go back to the party room, to the Cabinet, and suggest to them that they take the obligation of properly answering questions seriously. Now, I was at a Senate inquiry last Friday in relation to submarines, and I asked Admiral Mead, the head of the task force that informed the government before it made its decision on or announcement on the 16th of September to go down a different pathway to what they were going before, asked a simple question about about the advice that had been given to government about simple things like cost and schedule. One would think that if you're cancelling one program and moving to another program, that in actual fact you would only do so if you had at least some fundamental advice as to the cost and as to the schedule. I would ask the question about advice that was given to government, and the answer I got was an answer to a different question. I had to ask it several times. Not only did I have to ask it several times, I then had to remind the Admiral that he wears a naval uniform and he serves the Australian public and not political masters. And the culture that we're seeing across when we carry out estimates is getting worse. We're getting officials turn up refusing to answer questions, pretending they're answering when they're only responding. And we have to go again and again and again to get the answer. I know that the Select Committee on COVID has sought answers in relation to National Cabinet information, and despite a ruling by Justice White that National Cabinet is not a committee of the federal cabinet, the committee is still not getting answers back. And that's disgraceful. That's a judicial officer that's made a ruling that's being ignored by the government. So the Senate needs to sort of observe what's happening here. Answers coming back that aren't answers, they're responses. Going to estimates and not getting proper answers from officials. All of that is led from a culture at the top which is about secrecy. We can see that in the COAG amendment legislation, where the Prime Minister, having lost his battle the battle between me and him in the AAT, is now seeking to introduce a new secrecy law. Obsessed with secrecy. Just answer the questions. Just be open and honest. In actual fact, I pressed the Admiral. I actually had to say to him, "You are running very close to being in contempt of the Senate," before he finally answered, and the answer he gave me was quite reasonable. But why do we have this culture in there of let's not answer questions? We've got two matters before the Privileges Committee now. The first being the government's refusal to provide documents to the Economics Committee relating to naval shipbuilding, relating to one of the biggest government expenditures ever. And the documents that were requested were not confidential, they're not secret, they weren't top secret. They were simply documents provided to the government in order to help make a decision about which shipbuilder was going to get the job. These are documents that go to what these shipbuilders promised Australian industry, and the government has refused to provide answers, or in fact those documents, to the committee. That's gone off to privileges, and there is some progress being made in relation to that. But how do we get to this point? How do we get to this point where even documents being given to a committee who are willing to accept them in camera, such that they are protected by criminal sanction in the event of a leak, how do we get to this situation where the executive says we're not going to provide those documents to the Senate? Then we have a statutory official who receives a lawful order from the Senate. The Senate makes an order for production, and of course the Senate's always very reasonable in the way it conducts its business, much like a court who might issue a subpoena, gives the person subject to the order or subject to the subpoena the opportunity to step forward and say, I don't think I should respond to the subpoena for these reasons. I don't think I should respond to the order for production for these reasons. And then what happens is, in the case of an OPD, the Senate considers that response and makes its final decision. And that's exactly what happened in relation to the Tax Commissioner. The Senate made a decision that the balance of the public interest lied in disclosure. It disagreed with where the balance lied in terms of public interest, and made a lawful order. And anyone who thinks that I'm making this stuff up, go and read the 1998 High Court case of Egan and Willis. And I know Senator Keneally knows that because it relates to Mr Egan in the New South Wales Parliament. The High Court affirmed what was always known through Section 49 of the Constitution, that that Houses of Parliament have the ability to acquire or require the production of documents from the executive in order for it to be able to discharge its functions. So we're now in a situation where we have a couple of matters on foot with the Privileges Committee. Now, I'm hopeful that this is a Senate mojo moment. I look at how the US Senate conducts its inquiries, and I see officials that turn up to the US Senate. They dare not answer a question. They dare not provide a document which the US Senate orders, because they know that the US Senate will act. And in some sense, there's a test running in the background right now for the Australian Senate. We can push ourselves back into a position where we are treated with the absolute respect that the US Senate is treated in the US, or we can fail to deal with what I say, as a question of fact, is a contempt. The delay of the Naval Shipbuilding Committee proceedings for well over a year. That can't go unaddressed. And I hope the Privileges Committee finds that to be a contempt and issues a fine, and or applies a sanction. We have to change the culture. So, whilst I allege, I'll just assert that there is a culture of secrecy in the Morrison government, driven from the very, very top. In some sense, the Senate, when it seeks answers and doesn't get them, basically lets the executive get away with it and becomes part of the problem. So I'm hopeful that we will see a change, some Senate mojo. I refer back to Facebook a couple of years ago, where the UK House of Commons, they wanted access to documents from Mr Zuckerberg. He refused. Of course, he's outside jurisdiction. Someone turns up to the UK, and the House of Commons says, well, we've got someone who's got the documents, and they sent out the Sergeant-at-Arms, met up with the gentleman, invited him to come back in a very insistent way to the House of Commons, and offered him two choices: hand over the documents, or you can sit in the jail for a while. And the UK House of Commons got those documents because it stood up, because it exercised its powers. You don't have to do it many times. It's a little bit like freedom of navigation exercises. Every once in a while, you have to sail a ship through international waters, despite a country saying that they think it's their waters, in order to be able to assert a right, to remind people of the rights. And I hope the Senate stands up in these two instances, with these two privileges matters, to send a very strong message to the executive that they must respect our need to be well informed in what it is that we do, our need to be able to get access to documents when we ask for them. Okay, so what we're seeing today, the issue raised by Senator Keneally, is in fact part of a much broader problem. And I'd ask the minister to consider all of the things that I've said in relation to that today, understand the responsibilities of answering questions on time. It is really important, and again, it's disrespectful when you don't do that. I'll foreshadow to the minister that tomorrow I will also use the same standing orders in relation to the, I think it's 4 estimates questions that have been delayed or haven't been returned that I have asked. So consider that notice under the guidelines in respect of this standing order, and hopefully by tomorrow I will have all those answers. Otherwise we'll be back here having another conversation about the responsibilities of government and the need for them to be able to respond to the Senate in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Patrick. Were you seeking the call, Senator Gallagher? Okay. So the question is that the motion as moved by Senator Keneally be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against, I believe the ayes have it. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. Understanding Order 74 5A, I seek an explanation from the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham, as to why 2020-2021 additional estimates questions on notice numbers 1, 3, 5, 6, 501 and 519 to 531 inclusive, placed on the notice to the Finance and Public Administration Committee in the Prime Minister and Cabinet portfolio, remain unanswered.
Sorry, Kate. No, sorry.
Minister.
Thanks, Mr. President. Thanks, Senator Gallagher, for her question. Deputy President, as I indicated in response to Senator Keneally and have already indicated this week and on previous occasions, the government has been dealing with quite unprecedented numbers of questions posed through the parliament, and in doing so the government's been providing quite unprecedented numbers of answers to questions posed through the parliament. We're not talking about hundreds of questions, we're not talking about thousands of questions, we're actually talking about tens of thousands of questions in the life of this parliament, and the government works to try to provide answers where we can to those questions. I know there are some senators who seek to be quite diligent and earnest in the approach that they take most of the time, and I acknowledge in Senator Patrick's remarks that he just made, he stuck broadly to the question before the chair around accountability, around government responsiveness, and he addressed issues in terms of the particular nature of particular answers that are given. And so, although I don't accept the premise of all statements that Senator Patrick made in that regard, I acknowledge he at least stuck to the broad thrust of the debate. I think if the chamber reflects upon the remarks made by Senator Keneally immediately preceding Senator Patrick, you'd find that it was a much more politicised contribution, reflecting the fact that many times, particularly from those opposite, the questions asked are more about cheap point scoring. They're more about trying to advance political agendas. They are more about where you can try to seize a cheap headline or the like. Now, it's the right of those senators to spend their time asking those questions. And again, of the many thousands of such questions that come about, the government responds to them, even where there's a whole swathe of hypocrisy attached to them. I mean, Senator Keneally, in her remarks that jumped across many issues beyond the questions that she was asking about, spent some time talking about grant programs and recent comments in relation to grant programs. I note that one of those grant programs, subject of such commentary by Senator Keneally and others, is the Community Development Grants program and the Stronger Communities program. And I can't help but notice that so many members of the opposition quite happily take advantage of such programs, promote such programs, advocate for grants under such programs. But then, of course, if there's a cheap headline to be had, well, they're lining up, they're forming the conga line to be able to try to go after the cheap headline in the national political debate, while trying to seek out the good headline in their local media or their social media. I mean, the Leader of the Opposition himself, with a fabulous social media post, grants for Grandler. Could your community organisation use a grant, he says. And we've got not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but half a dozen different photos of Mr Albanese posing with different grant recipients, just in the one post there, happily showing. And of course, sort of much of that commentary from Senator Keneally, from others in this debate, has been about whether too many of these grants have been going to apparently city electorates rather than regional electorates. Well, if I'm correct, I think the electorate of Grangler is—
Sorry, Senator Birmingham, I think Senator Patrick's on his feet. Senator Patrick. Just
on a point of order, I note that the minister has wandered off the question that has been asked by Senator Gallagher and is actually referring to debate that took place in relation to a previous question.
This part of the standing orders is taking note, so it's a wide-ranging debate. It's taking note of unanswered questions, and I don't have the unanswered questions, so I'm not really in a position. But he's not answering a question; he's responding. Senator Patrick.
I was just moved by his statement that it's a good idea to stick to the topic of the question.
Thanks, Senator Patrick. I'm sure the minister was listening to your words. Minister, please continue.
Touché, Senator Patrick. Touché. Deputy President, indeed, I am responding a little lengthier than I did to Senator Keneally's question to me about unanswered questions, because of the way in which Senator Keneally sought to then address and elaborate more broadly in relation to those matters. I don't wish to detain the time of the Senate at length. I was simply making the point around the highly politicised nature of some questions. In other cases, we have seen, particularly this year, that questions often are in pursuit of sensitive matters, sometimes legally sensitive matters, that do pose extra challenges in relation to responding or answering to them, and that requires either extra advice being taken by government in response, extra care, or indeed sometimes highlighting the fact that such details are difficult to provide without compromising or prejudicing legal proceedings. So, Deputy President, look, I again come back to the substantive point that I made, which is that this government in this parliament has responded to more questions than were posed in the previous parliament or were posed in the parliament before that. We have been more responsive than any previous government has been asked to be. We continue to seek to be so. We have been handling literally tens of thousands, some close to 35,000 questions posed through different estimates or parliamentary chamber processes, I should say Senate chamber processes. That doesn't count House of Representatives questions, it doesn't count Senate Select Committee or Senate Standing Committee or House of Representatives Standing Committee or Joint Standing Committee or Joint Select Committee questions. They're all on top of the 35,000 that we have sought to handle to date, and indeed will continue to do so and provide responses in as timely a manner as possible, but it is in the face of record levels of questioning and indeed, in some cases, highly sensitive approaches too.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy President. Understanding Order 74.5b, I move that the Senate take note of the explanation. Well, if you listen to the Minister for Finance, I think essentially the argument about why the questions that I have asked for, which are I think 166 days overdue now, is because the government's had a lot of questions asked of it, more questions than previous governments. Well, I would submit that some of the explanation for that is because we've never had a government that's been so intent on not answering questions. I mean, many of these questions that I've asked that have been on notice now for 166 days or 166 days late could have been answered in the Estimates Committee. But they weren't, because this government's approach to transparency and accountability is to have public servants appear, and on anything that is not in the government's interest to answer, they will take it on notice or find another way not to answer the question. And that is a problem with the openness of this government, which has now got a consequential effect on the number of questions that are being taken on notice, which now the senator leaving the chamber is used as an excuse to say we're overworked. Well, it's only right that the Senate should get not only a reasonable explanation, other than, sorry, we came to work and are really busy and we haven't got round to it, which was essentially Senator Birmingham's submission to the Senate, to demand that this information be provided. You are the government, you are responsible and the guardians of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in public funds. You are making decisions on the nation's behalf. There are senators in this place elected to hold you to account. You answer those questions. Don't come in here and cry fake tears to say you're a bit busy and you haven't got round to it. Completely useless explanation. And the Prime Minister and Cabinet, who these questions are late from, is the worst offender in my experience. Led by the Prime Minister's right-hand man, the butler that runs when the bell gets rung by the Prime Minister to serve his every need, leads that department, and that is the standard they set, where they take things on notice and then have no intention of answering to the Senate. So force us to come in here and expose them and embarrass them, and I still don't think it'll matter to Mr Gaetjens or his crew, because that is the leadership under this Prime Minister that is shown about accountability, honesty, transparency, responsibilities to the parliament, accountability to the parliament, not just to executive government. And when it's led like that, and PM&C behave this way, why should any other department be any better? You know? Because it's clear they get rewarded, and we're heading into estimates next week. Let's see how many senior public servants paid hundreds of thousands of dollars turn up and don't have information available or aren't able to take that question right now. We'll get back to you, knowing full well that they can take 100 days or longer because there is no consequence, because they're rewarded by the leadership for doing that. That's my prediction of what will happen, and that's why we're here now, using up precious time in the Senate to make the point that this is unacceptable. That's why you just had that contribution from Senator Keneally and Senator Patrick, and I associate myself with the comments Senator Patrick made as well, because it's spot on. And I think what this government hopes is that this explanation, oh shucks, we got to work and we're a little bit busy, is enough to just keep it at bay until the election. I mean, you can see what's going on. But the longer and the bigger picture, after 8 years of this type of approach, is that these institutions, these conventions, the parliamentary practice that has developed over time and enshrined these processes as part of our democracy are getting chipped away at. And it's important that we stand up for them, and important that we call it out, even if Mr Gaetjens isn't going to answer my letter that I wrote to him asking him where these answers are, even if they come to estimates next week and refuse to answer. It is important that the Senate stand up, calls it out and tries to protect it. Because when you whittle away the public service, as has been done under this government, and you start whittling away the FOI Act, as has been attempted by this government and continues to attempt to do it, and when you disempower the Auditor-General, as this government has done in punishment and retaliation for the audit reports that it puts out on their rorting grant schemes, when you start wearing away the integrity processes of the parliament, there will be consequences on our democracy and on our access to information, and that is what we are standing up for. And that is what is happening here. It may not seem a lot that my questions 1, 3, 5, 6, 501 and 519 to 531 asked at March estimates 2021 might not seem much, but the fact that this is a systemic approach to dealing with questions on notice is about whittling away those parliamentary practices, the scrutiny role of the Senate, because it suits this government. It's exactly what it's doing. They've done it to the Auditor-General, they're doing it to the FOI Act, they're doing it to the way they deal with OPDs in this place. I mean, it's all pretty obvious. And maybe on its own, on their own, like, people don't see that it's that big a deal, but put it all together and there has been an 8-year-long assault on the scrutiny and accountability functions of the parliament. And that's why we are raising these points today. So it's not about an overworked government, it's about a secret government. It's a government that will do anything it can to keep information away from the public eye, regardless of the fact that it's paid for with public dollars, and if it's not in their political interests, they will withhold access to that information. And that's why we are raising these points today. And the issues that are covered by my questions actually relate to a lot of questions around the matters surrounding Ms Brittany Higgins and the role of the Prime Minister's office. There is a whole range of questions now that didn't suit the Prime Minister to ask at the time, and it doesn't suit him to answer now. But and the option available to the department is to provide an answer, including we are not in a position to provide this answer because, for example, there is a police investigation ongoing, something like that. They could do that, but they don't bother doing that either. It's just a blanket refusal to respond to reasonable questions asked of officials. Now, it suits the government to have this approach, I have no doubt about it. But we must stand up and we must ask for reasonable explanations, and we must demand that officials attend estimates with the answers to these questions. 166 days overdue. And I would hope, when you guys are on the opposition benches, that you would seek to protect these conventions too, but that you wouldn't have to fight so hard, because it would be working under a different arrangement with a government that actually understood and respected these practices. So I don't accept Senator Birmingham's explanation in any way, that this is just because they've got a lot of questions. They've got a lot of questions because they don't answer the questions when they show up, when they're required to show up, and they don't provide information they should provide without having to take it on notice. For example, the Doherty modelling that we spoke of yesterday. Why hasn't that been released? Why do you have to put in an FOI request and questions without notice and questions on notice about accessing that information? Well, there's a little saving for the count of questions on notice for Senator Birmingham. You could cut them down right now if you actually started releasing the information that you should release in the public interest. And you should answer the questions that have been asked. And senators should be treated with respect, and senators should be able to fulfil their responsibilities for their roles in this parliament, including holding this government to account. That's what this is about. Anyway, to Mr Gaetjens, I hope I do get a response from the letter that I wrote, and I am looking forward to receiving all of those answers to questions on notice that are now 166 days overdue before estimates meets on Monday. There is no reasonable explanation that I will accept about why these questions have not been answered and why they should not be answered in time by close of business tomorrow afternoon. You are just wilfully obstructing the work of the Senate if these are not answered. You've had plenty of notice. You were reminded of the obligations in a letter. You were reminded again today, as per the guidance around this standing order, that we are interested in the answers to these questions, and I look forward to receiving them by the end of this week.
Thank you, Senator Gallagher. So the question is that the motion is moved by Senator Gallagher be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Against? I believe the ayes have it. Senator Chisholm.
I rise to take note of answers given by Senator McKenzie and Senator Rushton to the questions asked by Senators Keneally, Gallagher and Wong.